Well, folks, today we are going to be diving in to the 2026 Senate elections, looking at a best case scenario for the Republicans. The reality is that the Republicans have an opportunity for the next decade to control the Senate, the United States Senate. Right now, the Republicans currently sit at 53 seats after their 2024 wins, but in 2026, this could be their chance to increase that 53 seats to 54, 55, 56 seats. We're going to be looking at what the most realistic situation is, and then what the best case scenario for the GOP is. Where is their ceiling? But if you're new here, do me a favor, drop down below, hit that subscribe button. Make sure you never miss another video from us in the future. So as we know, right now, like we said, currently the Republicans have 53 seats with their leader John Thune, recently elected to replace Mitch McConnell. And then you have the Democrat Chuck Schumer, who they have 45 votes or 45 seats, but then the two, Angus King and Bernie Sanders, who both caucus with the Democrats. So we're going to be looking at what is the most likely situation for the Republicans and then the best case scenario. So if you're looking at this map here, and we have one we need to fill in, so if you're looking at the Republicans, their top targets in the 2024 or 2026 Senate election are going to be really Georgia, Michigan, New Hampshire, Minnesota. This is where the Republicans can go on offensive. Some people might throw in Virginia. I think there's a stretch between number 4 and number 5. On my list, I think we should be targeting Georgia number 1, Michigan number 2, New Hampshire number 3, Minnesota number 4. And I go back and forth on Minnesota number 4 and number 3 just because they don't have an incumbent senator anymore, but there's a lot of downsides to the Republicans in the state of Minnesota winning an election like this. But then Virginia as that 5th seat on there. In Georgia, obviously, right now you have a current incumbent senator right now in Jon Ossoff, who will be running for re-election for the first time here. We know that back in 2021, he won his first race against incumbent Senator David Perdue at the time. He lost the popular vote in the first round of voting, and because neither candidate got 50%, it went to a runoff, and there he was able to scrape ahead by about 60, little less than 60, 55,000 votes. He was able to scrape ahead. This should be the number one target for Republicans in this race. If you look at the 2024 presidential election, this was a state that was carried by President Trump by about 2.5 points, I believe. Let's see. Yeah, about little shy, 2.3 points. He was able to run ahead, and this would be a huge opportunity. The Republicans missed their opportunity back in 2022 to flip the seat that was held by Raphael Warnock, another Democrat that represents the state of Georgia. They made the unfortunate decision to run someone like Herschel Walker in that race and ended up losing. We now have lost control of that seat for 6 years from 22, so we still have, until 2028, that seat will be up for re-election. This, like I said, should be the number one priority for Republicans in this race here, going after the Georgia Senate seat, where Jon Ossoff currently is. Number 2 in there would be Michigan. Right now, this has been a very competitive race in the past. Gary Peters, look at this, barely outran his opponent by about 90,000 votes back in 2020. John James, which there's a good chance that he could be the Republican nominee again in 2026. A lot of people think he could be the strongest candidate. Some people have also thrown out people like Mike Rogers in that race. Where is he? Republicans. Declined here. Who? Excuse me. That's in 2020. Looking here, Mike Rogers, and then you got John James down here. A pretty big list of people, but ultimately I think Mike Rogers and John James will be the best. Say no to Ronna McDaniel. Let's just get that out there right now. This is a seat, once again, President Trump won this seat here by about, a point and a half, 1.4 points, carried this seat. But at the same time, in that same election, Alyssa Slotkin won her election. She is a Democrat, was able to outrun Kamala Harris in this same election here. So these two should be the top priorities for Republicans in this race, Michigan and Georgia. You don't have an incumbent running in Michigan, and even if you did, it was still going to be a pretty damn tight race. Gary Peters, initially elected back in 2014, was elected by a pretty large margin at the time in 2014 when that was historically a good election for Republicans nationwide. 2020, which was not a great year for Republicans, we saw that it was a much, much, much closer election in the 2020 election. So it's going to come down to candidate quality here in Michigan, and really the National Senatorial Republican Committee properly funding these campaigns, making sure that the infrastructure is there to get the vote out. You need to get low propensity voters out. That's how Trump won. Low propensity voters. We need to follow on with that trend. And just jumping back to Georgia, just for a real quick second here, a lot of this is going to depend on who jumps in on the Republican side. I wholeheartedly believe that Brian Kemp will be the best chance that Republicans have to maintain this seat here. He's the only one in polls, and I get it, we're a very long ways out from the election, but he's the only one who, in a head-to-head matchup against Jon Ossoff, is beating Jon Ossoff in these races. People like Mike Collins, Marjorie Taylor Greene, John King, Rich McCormick, Brad Raffensperger are all running behind him. But obviously you can see a lot of these people, all but two, Buddy Carter and Marjorie Taylor Greene, are not going to run if Kemp decides to jump in the race, which, he's kind of weighing his options, the Senate, or there's also been ideas that he may be running for president in 2028. So I think a lot of this election is going to depend who is the Republican candidate. If Brian Kemp jumps in, this is going to be a great, great election to flip a seat. And kind of the same thing with Michigan. You jump over there. If John James is in this race, and if you have someone like Mike Rogers who is in this race, I definitely think this is a race that is winnable for Republicans to cement control of the Senate for decades to come. Now, those are the only two states where President Trump won in 24. They have Democrat senators who are up for re-election. Now, let's look at number 3 and number 4. New Hampshire. Oh, and I bet you I do not even have New Hampshire pulled up. Here we go. So right now, okay, on the Democrat side, okay, so incumbent Senator Jeanne Shaheen is running for re-election, initially elected back in 2008 when Barack Obama ran. And apparently the decision is expected here in March, but it looks like she has filed her paperwork. Publicly expressed interest on the Republican side, you have Scott Brown, who is the former U.S. ambassador to New Zealand and Samoa, and then a former U.S. senator from Massachusetts from 2010 to 2013. Chris Sununu, that was a name that's been thrown out there. The very, very popular former governor of New Hampshire. I wonder what he's going to be up to now. Is he going to be running for anything? Maybe looking at he's mulling a 2028 presidential run. I think if Sununu ran in this race, this would be a much, much tighter race. But as you can see, most people, and actually, we go from battleground state to a likely Democrat. So obviously the election analyses are not all on the same page here. I definitely would consider this a lean Democrat state as of right now, or a lean Democrat seat as of right now. As we know, Kamala Harris won the state by about 3 points, about 22,000 votes in the state. It's going to be tough for Republicans in New Hampshire, but I think with the right candidate and proper funding, I think this could definitely be a race that Republicans could flip. Now, let's take a look at the Minnesota, and do we have it, or we can just look at North Carolina real quick. Oh, we got 2 of those pulled up. Virginia. Okay, let's look at North Carolina next. North Carolina, you have incumbent Senator Thom Tillis, who's running for re-election, first elected back in 2014. He is no stranger to very, very tight races. You look at this here. He only outran his opponent by less than 50,000 votes in that election. I believe she was the incumbent in that election in 2014. Look at 2020. Outran his opponent by only about 100,000 votes against Cal Cunningham, who was his Democrat opponent in the 2020 election, which we know was a tough year for Republicans. President Trump still carried the state of North Carolina, but nationwide was not a great year for Republicans, as they lost the presidency, lost the Senate, and lost the House of Representatives. This could be a tough race. We've got some polling out of, and let's get it pulled up here. We've got some polling from PPP polls, public policy polling, showing that Roy Cooper, the former governor of North Carolina, is running ahead incumbent Thom Tillis by about 4 points right now, with 9% of the electorate undecided. In that same poll, they found a 19% approval rating, or I should say it's not he had a 42% approval rating for current Governor Josh Stein. President Trump underwater by about a point. Senator Tom Tillis underwater by 21 points. 21 points. Oh my God. In the same state, he's running 20 points behind President Trump. How is this needs to be something that is very much considered. Is Tom Tillis in the best position? But also, you look at 2020. There were polling that showed that Tom Tillis was running 5 to 10 points behind Cal Cunningham in this race in 2020. He ended up sneaking by about 2 points in the election. But all of the polling leading up to that election would have said that Tom Tillis was going to lose this election. So not going to fully rely on the polling. But when you're showing that someone's underwater by 21 points in the same election or in the same poll, that President Trump is only underwater by a point, not a great look. Let's get some more polling out, absolutely, but definitely something that the Republicans need to keep in the back of their mind in the North Carolina Senate election. Jumping over to, let's look at Virginia. This would be my number 6. If the GOP is going to target something, it's going to be Virginia, number 6 here. I think if Glenn Youngkin decided to jump in this race, this could make it a very, very competitive race. Glenn Youngkin obviously won in 2021 to be the governor of Virginia, was a very solid conservative governor, very good approval rating, very popular governor in the state, could run for Senate because he is term limited for his governorship now, and could run against current incumbent Senator Mark Warner. Obviously, you look back to 2020, he outran his opponent by about 550,000 votes, outran him by about 13 points. You jump back to 2014, which was a tough election for Democrats, very good for Republicans. Only outran his opponent by, not even 20,000 votes? This could be a very, very tight race if we see something like this, especially if you throw someone like Glenn Youngkin into this race. I think that these prediction services are not going to be saying solid D, maybe lean Democrat, but ultimately I think this could be a toss-up state with Glenn Youngkin. He's a good fundraiser, big name, popular name on the national stage, and could be a great senator from Virginia. Now, if you're looking at the map, what does that turn out to? Oh, we forgot the most important one. I shouldn't say the most important. Let's see. Minnesota Senate race 26. This is where current incumbent Senator Tina Smith is not seeking re-election. She declined to seek re-election. Let's look back. She was initially appointed by Governor Mark Dayton. After Al Franken resigned, she took his seat, won her special election by about 10 points, ran ahead of Karen Housley, who is a state senator in Minnesota, was able to run ahead of her by about 300,000 votes. And let's take a look. In 2020, when she ran to keep the seat for a full 6-year term, the margin was a lot closer. Only about 5 points. She only ran ahead of her Republican opponent by about 150, 160,000 votes in this race. But as we know, current Lieutenant Governor from Minnesota, Peggy Flanagan, will be running for this Senate seat after Tina Smith announced she was not running. She jumped in the race almost immediately. Some other people who have expressed interest, Angie Craig, Keith Ellison, Melissa Hortman, the radical Ilhan Omar, and Keith Ellison. This is what I think about this race here. For the Republicans to win the seat, there has to be a lot of things that line up. A lot of things that you have to look that are going to line up. First of all, you need a good Republican with a good statewide Republican, good name recognition, who is not Royce White. Royce White did terrible in the 2024 U.S. Senate race, got blasted by Amy Klobuchar by 16 points. President Trump only lost Minnesota by, 4 points? Royce White ran behind him by 12 points. Horrid candidate. Horrible candidate. You can go listen. He's got a number of debates on X with different people. Go listen to him. The guy is just kind of a nut. Policy-wise, do I agree with some of his positions? Absolutely. But that type of Republican just is not going to win in Minnesota. I'm really sorry to tell you that. But the things that need to line up. The Democrats need to nominate a crazy radical left-wing lunatic. Someone like a Keith Ellison, a Melissa Hortman, Angie Craig, Ilhan Omar, or Peggy Flanagan. If any of those four are the nominee for senator for the Senate in 2026, and the Republicans at the same time are able to put a good Republican candidate, traditional conservative, who is not a ultra mega conservative, but is an America First Republican, who has good name recognition, who can fundraise and campaign well in the state of Minnesota, who has the backing of the National Republican Senatorial Committee, then you could see it. I can definitely see it happen. But if you have someone like Angie Craig, who is, relative to where all the Democrats are, is much, much more moderate than, per se, Keith Ellison or Ilhan Omar or Peggy Flanagan. These people are radical, left-wing lunatics who want to trans all the kids. That's what they want to do. They want to push critical race theory in the classroom. They believe in a binary system of oppressor and the oppressed, and the white people are the oppressors. Ilhan Omar, we don't even need to talk about her. She's just anti-Semitic. She hates Jewish people, and it is very, very clear that she does not like them. So, the Republicans could, if the stars line up on multiple different fronts, you could see the Republicans taking this seat. But this is where I see best case scenario for the Republicans. The Republicans are narrowly able to overturn the Georgia race, able to kick John Ossoff out. Brian Kemp wins. He runs and wins in the state. I see that's very, very possible. Michigan. I can see us winning Michigan. You have someone like Pete Buttigieg, who's currently leading the charge for the Democrats in Michigan. We'll see how the Midwestern voters think about these carpetbaggers like Pete Buttigieg, who is initially from Indiana. But we're going to see what happens there if you have a good candidate like a John James or a Mike Rogers there. I think that could very easily, with good funding, could be a Republican victory there. New Hampshire, I don't see it happening. Chris Sununu declined. I just don't see it happening. I really hate to burst anybody. I see Minnesota turning red before I see New Hampshire turning red, if I'm being 100% honest with you. And so I would say best case scenario, you're looking at the Republicans hold on in North Carolina, the Republicans hold on in Minnesota, and depending on how, and it really a lot also depends on how the Republicans perform the next year and a half. Are they able to get their domestic spending proposals through Congress? Are they able to enact their economic policies so Americans can see relief from higher prices? If so, if they are able to follow through on that, I definitely could see Virginia being competitive. So I'm going to say that probably 56 or 57 is where the Republicans are going to max out. Now, that's their ceiling. The stars line up. This is where we're going. Now, if we're looking at what's the most realistic, if we're being realistic, I would say this is probably the race you're looking at. And I'm just, North Carolina is such a tough one. It's a toss-up, but ultimately I would probably still say that Tom Tillis will pull out at the end, but this is, if you're looking at it, the most realistic situation you're going to see here. The Democrats barely squeak by in Minnesota. They win by a couple points in New Hampshire. They win by a number of points in Virginia. The Republicans are able to pull out in Michigan, Georgia, North Carolina, and defend Susan Collins' seat in Maine. That is what my thoughts are. The best case scenario for the Republicans in the 2026 election, you're probably looking at 56, 57 seats. What's the most realistic? You're looking at probably 54 or 55 seats in this election here. So let me know what your thoughts are down in the comments. Do you agree with how I feel the Republicans should be ranking this as Georgia number 1, Michigan number 2, New Hampshire or Minnesota number 3, and then whoever's after, you split these two up, then number 5 for Virginia? Let me know what your thoughts are in the comments, and that's going to wrap things up for today.